We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings, this is the Anadromist, Byrne Power, coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia, on a nice warm day, about 35 degrees Celsius. It's about 95, 96 or so Fahrenheit. So here we are. Well, I want to continue with our discussion about time and why it is so important. Again, you may hear noise because there's little children and cats and other things running around here, people. So if you do, you do. I can't really hide myself from it. It's Georgia. So, last time, if you remember, I discussed how I came to understand the importance of time and memory, and how I began to understand that we had created a society that was living against the effects of time, as if time did not exist. What we had done is we put it into a box, put it into a clock, measured it, divided it up, and passed it around and forced us to live by schedules, which suddenly gave life a very strange sort of mood. Today what I'm going to talk about is how we live against time. I want to really underscore that we do really live in a world that underscores time. Some people will say we live in a place where time itself is actually gone crazy. But it's not time. It's our measurements of time and what we've done as a result. In other words, my personal feeling is that we are living against the effects of time. We live in an age, unlike any age in history, that has decided time doesn't matter, except, of course, in speeding it up and accelerating it and erasing the effects of time. But that living within time, which is more personal and is, you can't put into the box of measurement in the same way that you do spatial things. That living within time is how we recover a sense of sanity and of meaning in our lives. The reason we started living against time is because of traditions. In the past, societies generally lived in time, which meant at that point the effects of time were much harder on people. You couldn't travel fast to get anywhere. You could only go as fast as you could walking, or by horseback at most, or by ship if you were so lucky. You went by the calendar. You went by the traditions, which now I find this very interesting living in Georgia. People are much more traditionally oriented. Even people who seem very modern will often hearken back to the legends and traditions in the mythology of Georgia into the past, and they will rely on these things in a way in which certainly Americans never do. But tradition used to be a heavy, heavy burden. So, and still, and you find this here now more than you do in America, people wanting to escape traditions. Well, how are they going to escape traditions? By becoming more modern. And how are you going to become more modern? By exposing yourself to more and more diversity, to more and more of people's opinions from around the world, by also traveling more, in other words, by erasing the effects of time more. Now, maybe this is inevitable, obviously, in a sense it is. Nevertheless, it's created a culture where we live against the effects of time. One of the main ways in which we live against the effects of time is speed. Speed. Now, James Gleick, a few years ago, back in the late 90s, produced a book called Faster, the acceleration of nearly everything. I highly recommend this book as just documentation on what we've done. And that was back in the 90s. It's gone much further since then, but nevertheless, that will give you a good idea. Let me read you a quote from James Gleick. I'm trying to look at many, many things in modern life that I believe are going faster. And I'm trying to look at why they're going faster and what effect they have on us. We all know about FedEx and instant pudding, but it doesn't mean we've looked at all the consequences of our desire for speed. Exactly. We live in a world where we just take it for granted you're supposed to get the newest technological device for making things happen faster, without ever asking, what's behind our desire to go faster? Paul Virilio is a French philosopher. He died a couple of years ago. I wish I'd met him, but then again, I wish I'd met a lot of people. But he has been specifically interested in the problems created by speed. He calls what he does dromology, the study of speed, dromology. And he's written quite a few books on the subject. With speed, the world keeps on coming at us, to the detriment of the object, which is itself now assimilated to the sending of information. It is this intervention that destroys the world as we know it. Technique, or technology you could say, now reproducing permanently the violence of the accident. The mystery of speed remains a secret of light and heat from which even sound is missing. Pretty amazing stuff when you stop and think about it for a moment. And I advise you do. And I advise you look up some of Paul Virilio's books. Someone suggested recently that I should do a list of book recommendations. And that's not a bad idea, and I think I'm going to do that. Another way in which we eliminate the effects of time is through travel, which of course relates to speed. An airplane flight, even your trip to the airport is all done in a speed which would have dizzied anyone 100 years ago. We find certain things. One, we find time zones. Now, time zones are a very strange thing. We assume there have always been time zones, but time zones are a relatively recent invention in human history. They only came in with the need to correlate all of the different trains and their schedules in different locations, particularly in England. They found that the time in different places was different, so they had to find a way to get the train schedules in sync. Once they did that, then they discovered, oops, people in other countries are doing very different things with their clocks. And so eventually they started creating time zones. And this was all to regulate schedules for trains, which I don't think is an accident, the schedule and its relationship to technology. Time zones then create strange effects like jet lag. Jet lag is a real problem. Now, if you're young, if you're, say, under 30 right now, and you go traveling from, New York to Paris or California to London or something like that, you're going to feel the effects of a bit of jet lag, but it's not going to really strike you as that big a deal. You just say, I need to sleep a little more. The older you get, as I've discovered, the more jet lag affects you. Why? Because it has to do with your circadian rhythms, your sleep rhythms, your light rhythms, when you're used to getting up and when you're used to going to bed. And here's a question. How much can you disrupt these things and still, what happens as you disrupt them? Well, we know that all sorts of things happen. Physiological things happen. But we don't think much about it. I have friends who traveled from Alaska to Paris in a single night, thinking they would go out and look at Paris that night, not realizing the effects of jet lag, because they hadn't been traveling across the world for quite a while. We live in a world where jet lag is a real sickness. In fact, one of the things James Gleick quotes, or I don't know, maybe he coins the phrases. I think he's quoting it from someone else. It's hurry sickness. The feeling inside that you always have to get somewhere. It's analogous to that weird sort of sickness you feel like someone may be trying to contact you through your phone right now. You know, I need to check my text messages, which is also has to do with the sickness of our relationship to time right now. Also, travel has become a strange sort of thing. And travel is more than just taking vacations. When I lived in New York City, people would move with regularity. They say the average American moves every 5 years. I tend to believe it. And when people move, what they're doing is they're escaping. For instance, who wants to live in the same city as your parents? So you're going to go to somewhere interesting, somewhere exciting. So you're going to go to New York or Boston or San Francisco, and then you find you can't get in there because it's too expensive. So then you end up in a suburb, but that's not really good. So then you end up going somewhere else. And then someone comes up with a job in Austin, Texas. So you go there. And then someone says, well, I have to go back and deal with my parents. So they leave, or I need to finish school. So they go somewhere else. And people are always traveling. What we're also doing by traveling is escaping the effects of the past. Because when things get difficult, you just move. Oh, there's these people I don't want to talk to anymore. There's a person I never want to see again. You just move. Well, there's no answer in that. And so much of our traveling is also to escape the effects of time. Walker Percy, in his book Lost in the Cosmos, talks about traveling as being a means of escape for the humdrumness of everyday life that is so hard for us to deal with. And he talks about the real problem with travel is the problem of re-entry, of how you come back into your life again. Another way in which we live against time is through our work. First of all, for most of us, our work is no longer seasonal. That is, we work at a job which every day, in fact, the lighting is the same. I mean, when I lived in New York City, I worked at a very large record store, J&R Music World, downtown in New York. Huge, huge place, still there. And it was, every day you come in and there was just this embankment of lights, of all these fluorescent lights overhead that were the same every day. They did not change. And what that effectively meant, in the winter, I would leave work, I'd rather leave home in the morning to go to work while it was dark. There'd be an hour in the middle of the day where I would go outside and go look for lunch. Then I would leave work at 5 o'clock or so when it was dark again. And so you lived in this weird zone where there was no reference to the light outside. And many people have jobs like that. Which is, again, if there are no seasons, well, seasons are one of the ultimate ways we have of telling time and of remembering it. Also, we work in jobs which are purely repetitious. For instance, if you work as a cashier at a McDonald's, who's to say what the day is? You know, it's just another Big Mac, a filet of fish, and a milkshake. You know, how can you tell one day apart from another? But of course, it's the same if you're sitting in a cubicle or just any sort of job involving staring at a screen all day. Or, you know, these things, I mean, yeah, there's like, okay, this project is big. We need to have it done in a month or whatever. But it's not memorable work. It's repetitious. And this also eats up your memory and your sense of time while working. So in so many of our jobs, and I'm sure you can think of your own examples, where we work against time, as if time does not exist. That is real time. Entertainment. We live in a weird world of entertainment where, for instance, so much of our entertainment is subject to, well, screens. That's just like, pow, now. Then there's film, TV, videos that are all edited. Now, I'm trying to do this video as close to just me talking as possible. It's got to be edited, though. And so there will be little gaps between things, obviously. Movies are full of them. You should sometimes count the seconds as you're watching a film, say on television. Count the seconds between edits and how quick they often come. And what that does to your sense of time. It actually makes the life in the real world seem boring because it doesn't move along like that. It's like suddenly, it's interesting if you watch a film from the 1970s, and I was just watching one the other day, and you would follow someone. What was it? I was watching from late 60s. I was watching Antonioni's Blow Up. And you see someone get up, walk down the stairs, go to the car, and drive down the road. I mean, who's got time for that anymore? We have to cut it. MTV's visual cut editing style did a lot to change that. Just to simply okay, we know he's going to do the car. Okay, the only time you're going to see a car key is when you put it in and it makes the car blow up. It's just like, go, go, go. We haven't got time for this. We know about this. We're cool. We're ironic. We've got it. They're going to the car. Stop showing us this. Instead of, maybe there's something interesting happening on the way. Maybe you need to feel the passage of time. This is what makes Tarkovsky the greatest filmmaker, in my opinion, because he puts you in time. It's his version of time, of course. But nevertheless, there are scenes that just go on and on and on where he doesn't take a camera break and doesn't even move the camera and just has things happening in the background. I particularly think of a wall crumbling in the film Nostalghia. Just incredible. You're sitting there, it's like you're suddenly realizing, oh my goodness, I'm not just staring at a wall. I'm staring at something happening. It's breaking apart slowly outside in the rain. Very strange. But also, when you think about the rhythms in our dance music these days, there was a guy who wrote an article about disco music in the late 80s for the New Musical Express, NME. And he wrote that disco's rhythms, it didn't begin somewhere and end somewhere. He used the phrase omular, om. It's just like it just goes on and on and on. And it's weird that it ever starts and stops. And so much of our electronic dance music today is exactly like that. That is to say, it has no logical beginning or end. And it's just when you enter the picture or don't. That is the only key. In fact, you shouldn't arrive there at the beginning of anything. You shouldn't leave at the end of anything. You should just come and go, and the music just goes on and on. Which is a very strange thing, because music in the past was not like that, except when some tribe or group wanted to put people into a trance. But most people realized that there was what this does is essentially trance-like. And that is the problem. So the trance is a very different way of working against time. It's to pretend that all that is now, and now, and now, and now. And nothing ever happened yesterday, and nothing's going to happen tomorrow. It's just now. And that is so much of our culture now. And our entertainment, video games, I'm looking at you, is like that, where it just goes on and on. I mean, one of the reasons I think people were upset with Game of Thrones is because they come to see Game of Thrones as being more important than their own lives. And so when you end a series like that, of course, there was no way of doing it to satisfy people. And I'm not going to get into, what they should have done or shouldn't have done or whatever like that. But just the fact that it ended is disturbing to people. And this is why one of the biggest problems is when you have a good television series, how do you end it? Well, the closer you come to the ending of a series, the more people start to complain because they don't want it to end when it's good. Because, in fact, one of the things we've done in our entertainment is created a world in which we are caught inside this thing. It's an artificial time. And that's one of the things, is that we are surrounded by artificial times that we live within. I mean, video games, all the games are so much like this. It's just like you dip your head in. It's even that way when you're just looking around on YouTube or something. You look for 5 minutes, 5 hours goes by. How does that happen? It happens because we leave this time that we live in and we go inside the time of the entertainment. And Tarkovsky does point out the importance of time within films as a way of helping us to understand times. But it's also just as important to realize in the commercial world, all that time is problematic time because they're taking you away. They're not really helping you to do anything. When you walk out of a Marvel movie, you don't feel stronger like dealing with the world. You just feel kind of like, wow, that was a lot of stuff. And do you even remember it all? Unless you're an obsessive, you probably don't, because they just spent 3 hours throwing the kitchen sink at you, except it was a really cool digital kitchen sink. And of course, there are drugs. Now, drugs are very interesting, what they do to time, but they generally are about destroying the effects, different kinds of effects of time, depending on the kind of drug. So, we have stimulants. Stimulants are to make time go faster, and so that you live within time. You're like, yes, I'm getting something done. It's all right. I know what I'm doing. It's like, it's great, isn't it? Well, no, because you're like, you're on speed, you're on coke, you're on meth, you're going way too fast, you're on an amphetamine blur. Life isn't like that, and it destroys the body because the body is saying, hello, you can't go this fast in your brain and keep your body keeping up. We're gonna fall apart. We need food, we need life, we need rest, we need this. But instead, stimulants deal with one way of looking at the world. Depressants, all those things to calm you down because life is too crazy. Stimulants, in a sense, give you the illusion of keeping up with the pace of things. But depressants are saying basically, it's too much. I can't cope. I can't sleep. I need something that'll shut me down. It's too much for me. And again, it's the result of a diseased relationship with time. Narcotics are even more so. Narcotics are the big one of the bunch here, because what they say to you is like, man, don't even deal with it. It's just a dream. Just go into the dream, sleep, just get rid of the pain, give it up. They're not just analgesics. Analgesics are the things that help you get rid of the pain, but they are the things that narcotics do something very, very different. They put you into this strange sort of pleasant dream world. The problem is, it pulls you completely out of time. And then it's like debt consolidation. All the problems you have just disappear into the end of a needle or into a pill or into, it just disappears. You stop thinking about it, but you know what? The effects of time are still going on behind you. And eventually comes time to pay the piper. Eventually, the chickens come home to roost. And will someone ever explain to me what that means? Why is it bad when the chickens come home? I think if your chickens were gone, you'd want them to come home. Just a thought. And finally, we come to the one that most people consider the most fun, psychedelics. And what psychedelics do is put you in the now. It's all the eternal now, and it's the eternal wow. It's this thing, it's like, wow, looking at everything differently, watching the colors differently, experiencing visions and such, and you're put inside this space. And some people, it makes them wonder, what is life about? But for many people, what it does is it just addicts them to the wow. And it's also completely living against time. What it is an imitation of the eternal. And I find the things in life that are imitations of the eternal to be some of the most problematic things. Another thing that's an imitation of the eternal, gold, diamonds. Very problematic elements and the way we circle around those things. But the hallucinogenic experience is definitely something that's like it's a false imitation of the eternal. And the problem with that is, it's addictive as such. It's not addictive physiologically in the same way. It's addictive teleologically. It's addictive as far as the meaning of it goes. It's a false meaning because that's not the meaning of life. The meaning of life is not your perception. The meaning of life is your relationships with people and things and animals and God. That's where the meaning is to be found. Not in your perceptions, but in your relationships. But it's also completely works against the idea of time. Information has become a means of working against time. Consider the way you use the computer to look up things and the fact that you think you know something by spending 5 minutes on Wikipedia looking something up. When in fact, as I've often said to students of mine, Wikipedia is a fine place to start. It's a terrifying place to end. If you think you know something after reading it on Wikipedia, you really know nothing. And don't ever consider yourself intelligent. You have to do some serious research and reading and studying to understand anything in life. But our global information system now is very, very much a problem in time, because it's kind of like saying to yourself, well, yeah, all this information can be found on the internet. Well, I'll tell you one thing, all this information cannot be found, because there are many kinds of things. For instance, if you want to make a violin, you know what? You can do all sorts of stuff. You can find someone who will discuss it on YouTube, you can read about it, but you know what? Until you make a violin, you don't know it. And the first violin you make won't mean anything. And the second one, maybe. And unless you actually find somebody who can pass on the very difficult task of making a violin, you will make bad violins that look like violins that aren't really violins. That's what you would get just from looking at the internet. In other words, everything that we learn takes time. And so you cannot simply learn from the internet. You have to also have what Michael Polanyi calls the tactile dimension. You have to touch it. You have to be able to hold on to it. You know, you don't know anybody because you typed at them or you Skyped them and suddenly you're talking to them. You know nothing until you actually, it takes time. So maybe through enough time and communication, you can get to know somebody on the internet. And by that, I mean years. I don't mean like in a month you're going to get to know anyone. This is why all the things related to dating and romance on the internet are, it's just a nightmare, because there's no way you can know. And, but the temptation is there, that you think you do know somebody through that. And we also have this idea that we're saving time all the time. There's all these time-saving devices. And the one thing that's sure is anything that promises to save you time is losing time. And in fact, I've got a quote here somewhere where Jacques Ellul says, saved time is wasted time. We never do anything with our saved time. But I'll come to that in another edition of this time discussion. Let's see, human relationships. Yeah, so we have they're all in the realm of destroyed time. Our technological interface only goes with our fear of commitment. We want some way to get to know somebody. For instance, if you type, yes, I like Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, and I love playing, Star Wars games, and I'm a real fan of Marvel movies. Does that tell you anything about anybody? No. Why? Because I'm sure I could find you millions of people for whom those things are true. And how do they like these things? How do you know? Well, the truth is, it's all an illusion in time. That is to say that just simply knowing these kinds of facts about somebody tells you very little. I mean, if you love those things and someone says, I dislike them, well, you know what? How do you know that person's not a good person? They just happen to like something different than you, which is interesting, because one of the things that's happened in our human relationships, and I think this is a time problem, is that we no longer have time for people who have disagreements with us. That is catastrophic, because the truth is, if you get to know anyone long enough, you're going to have a disagreement with them somewhere on some issue. So how do you get to know people if you only want people around you who are like you and make you feel safe? You're never going to feel safe in human relationships. And it also inspires us in a kind of semi-nomadic life, where you feel like you can drift along through the world. You can go traveling and you're always in touch with people. But, hey, I've got, I don't know how many Facebook friends now. It's moving up towards 800. I don't really look at the numbers very often. But, how many of those people do I really know? Well, certainly cut half off instantly and just say, I don't know them at all. They're just there because they saw something I did and, whatever. It's nice, great, but, they don't mean much to me. Then you can cut another half off instantly. It's just people you said hello to briefly, and they're gone, and they probably won't, you talk to them a little bit and they're gone. And occasionally you poke at something they do. If you're like me, you have all sorts of filters, so you don't have to look at everybody's business all the time. Paul Virilio really wrote about these issues, and he talks about the residents and the refugees. And by residents, he's talking about the people who live in this global world now. He says the residents are not the people what they are is the people who feel at home everywhere while they're traveling because they have a cell phone. And so they feel like, they're always sending photos back to Instagram, or they're typing into Twitter and they're saying, I did this, I did that, aren't I interesting? Isn't my life interesting? It's like, look at my breakfast, isn't that interesting? Don't you wish you were here? And in fact, you really don't wish you were here. You wish they were doing what they were doing and you were doing what you were doing. And you wish you could really have a conversation with them. But instead, you're reduced to this thin layer of information that you get on human behavior through your friends. It's better than nothing, I suppose, but we could argue that point as well. But Virilio also, in another place, calls these people the sedentaries and the nomads. I mentioned he talks about the residents and the refugees, and the refugees are at home nowhere. They are the people the poor, the people who live in countries where they feel like nothing is happening, because the illusion of the big media is that there is nothing happening in, say, I don't know, Botswana or Mali. That the real things places where things are happening is like New York City. Why does everyone say their small town is like boring? And yet they come to New York City and then they'll go to a rock club and they'll stand along a wall and look bored on purpose. It's a very strange thing. It isn't that your small town is boring. It's that your life has no meaning. And when things have no meaning, everything is boring. But Virilio says the contemporary sedentary, or resident, is someone who feels at home everywhere thanks to cell phones, and the nomad, in this terminology here, or the refugee, is someone who does not feel at home anywhere, someone who is excluded, ostracized. And one can think about what's going on with it's interesting, the people who are most in favor of the refugees getting into other countries are the residents who are happy anywhere, which is very strange. They're the ones who want a borderless world. And yet the other people, what they really want is a home. And there's something very different between wanting a home and wanting to feel at home everywhere. I'm just going to leave that hanging in the air. I don't know what to think about it. I just came up with the idea myself. But there it is. I'll put it out there for you. And then self-consciousness is a real problem in time. It's a serious problem in time. What do I mean by self-consciousness? I do not mean the same. Let's use the word self-awareness as a person who understands themselves, understands their history, understands their times, knows where they are, knows who they are, and use self-conscious, as it's often used, as someone who is too aware of other people looking at them, too aware of being showing up in someone's video, too aware of being photographed, too aware of hearing their own voice, too aware of what they look like when they compare themselves to how people act in films, too aware of their lives. They say their lives are like a sitcom, that their lives are like, isn't this like a movie, my life? Wouldn't my life make a great movie? To which the answer is probably no, it would make a really sad movie. We see ourselves in this self-consciousness as a visual construct, not living in time. How do you think people can put endless selfies of themselves? All the women putting pictures of themselves with, the duck pad on, on Instagram or whatever. It's like, how is it that we can live like that if you don't simply see yourself as a visual construct? That is, say, as a photograph, as a piece of film. We are visualized constantly, and we see ourselves, everything is seen, in a sense, everything is seen as just this visual sense. But here is the truth. When you look in a mirror, you don't really see yourself. First of all, you're only looking at yourself straight on, which is why it's always a bit disturbing to see yourself on the side, and everyone has issues with their nose. Just get used to it. You think your nose is weird. I think my nose is weird. I've rarely met people who don't think their nose is weird. Or if you pointed it out, then they would. That's the interesting thing about that story. Find someone with a perfect aquiline nose and then say to themselves, your nose is too thin, they will immediately start feeling weird about their nose. It's just how it goes. But the point is that we don't really know what we look like in the mirror. Plus, it's reversed. Plus, it's flattened. The image is flattened. And how can you tell? Well, look in a mirror. Take a friend with you. Have your friend and you look in the mirror. Now look at your friend and look at the mirror. Now, so you can't see it with yourself because you're too involved in yourself. But look at your friend in the mirror. Do you have any problem whatsoever telling the difference between which one's in the mirror and which one's the real person? Absolutely not. Even if you had them face to face, one in the mirror, one here, like this, and you were able to look, you would immediately know the difference. There's just, why? Because the mirror isn't you any more than the photograph is you. When people take all these photographs of people laughing, everyone's seen bad photos of themselves. I don't show bad photos to people of themselves. I try not to. I mean, of course, sometimes I think a photo is good and they don't. That happens. But when you see a photo of yourself, it's this much of yourself, and it's just, if your face is like this, that would be the shot I would use. That's not you. You're always in movement. So there's 1 second of yourself. If you look at that and say, oh my God, do I really look like that? And the answer is no, you don't. Again, the photo tells you very little about yourself. The film tells you a little, or the movie tells you a little more. But even that, it doesn't tell you, for instance, movie cameras don't like people with kind of like thin set eyes. It's just the way it goes. Whereas in fact, in reality, people with some thin set eyes are fine. It's just that in the camera, it's because of the flattening effect, it looks a little different than it should. So we live in a society that is nearly completely based on a denial of the effects and the meaning of time. This is where we live. Almost everything is a denial of everything that is in time. And it's only by living in time that we can begin to understand the meaning of the reality that surrounds us. You get it? We're living in a completely false world. Not really completely false, but so much of what we're tempted to think is real and something to aspire to, these images that we're aspired to become images, not characters in time. So I suppose that all begs the question, what do I mean by time? What is time? And that's what we're going to discuss next time. But I wanted to underline here, and I could have done it in 1,000 more ways. I'm always seeing more ways in which we are no longer living with any reference to time. And what's interesting, this has gone on long enough that now we're not living with reference to space that much either. We're living only in this virtual world, but we'll come to that several episodes down the line here. Meanwhile, hey, I would really like to thank the people who have enlisted in my PayPal subscription paywall, and they have already received about 7 hours worth of material, which I would send to you if you decide to become a monthly subscriber for like $10 a month, or if you just do a one-time $50 donation. So think about that. Subscribe if you haven't already. Just simply, on YouTube, just go down there and smite that like button down there. Also, I do got more coming up. I'm working on the next How We Got Here series is going to be a tough one. This is why I've slowed down on doing that, because it's going to be about this moment in the late 70s, early 1980s. It's where the culture war really kicked into gear. And it's the moment of when evangelical Christians became political. It's the moment when gay activists became political. It's the moment of Ronald Reagan. It's also the moment when things just became really strange in the 1980s. So I am working on that, but that's going to take me several more weeks to get around to. It's going to be a big one. It's going to be, you're going to want to wait in time for that, aren't you? But meanwhile, and I'm going to be editing my Conceptual Humanity lecture together, which is really I don't know how that's going to be received, but we'll throw it out there, and if you got rocks to throw at me, I'll take them. Fortunately, it'll be digital rocks, and I'm in Georgia, and you can't find me with physical rocks, so I'm okay. But, you know, it's I call my website the Anadromous life. It's the life that is lived going upstream, going against the tide. G.K. Chesterton said, the only thing that goes downstream is dead. Don't be dead. Be alive. Swim against the stream. That's the Anadromous life. This is Byrne. Just live the Anadromous life.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.